I think we've all got those games that we wish we could play for the first time again. For me, some of those games are Outer Wilds, Subnautica, Portal 2. There are just so many that I could talk about for hours and hours. Those are some of my favourite games of all time, and one of the reasons that they're so special to me is because I played them on a complete whim. As much as I love, say, Sonic Mania, I knew what I was getting myself into. I watched the trailers and let the hype build over months. But this video is about just one of those games, one series of games, from a now legendary developer, Dark Souls, by From Software. I wish I was able to declare that, why yes, I got into the Souls series back in 1862 when Cthulhu was birthed out of the Thames and we rallied together to harvest its blood echoes, but it's nothing like that at all. It was less than 2 years ago that this game made such a remarkable impact on me. It wasn't the challenge that attracted me, maybe it helped, because I have liked difficult games in the past, but it was mostly the world. There was something so alluring about it. Dark Souls is far from the best game ever made, but it's still one of my favourites. People often give it the moniker, the flawed masterpiece, saying the first half is near perfection, while the second sees a drop-off in quality akin to falling from the top of Sen's Fortress back down to the undead parish. I think there's still some pain from that first playthrough. I don't necessarily agree with the notion that the first half's a masterpiece and that the second is pure scum, but I do think that up until Anno Londo, Dark Souls is on another level. But even that first half is riddled with these pustules of frustration like the Capra Demon or the Red Drake. And as bad as Lost Izalith is, because it really is terrible, there's still that ever-important sense of intrigue in the last half, like the Pasakas in the Duke's Archives, or the mystery of how Zacian made it into Lordran. That's not even to mention the outstanding DLC which, although I don't really like the Chasm of the Abyss, provides 3 of the best bosses in the entire game, one of them helping to define the future of the series. And just look at Manus. This is such a great design and it pains me to say that From Software would never iterate on it ever again. Art design is one of this studio's many strengths, whether it be creating compelling characters or having this amazing sense of scale in the world. It's unnerving how vast Lordran is. What other tragedies exist beyond this confined play space? Just how much has the undead curse afflicted this land? Something I love is that when you see a distant landmark, you're probably gonna go there eventually and the distance that you need to travel feels believable. Part of the reason for that is the interconnected world design. I could say that by having almost every location connected to at least 2 others with a myriad of shortcuts planted into each level, you gain a greater understanding of the world, which is true, but quite frankly, I just think it's really cool. It's something none of the other Souls games can capture quite as well. Being able to go all the way back to Firelink Shrine organically after conquering the first area is just awesome, man. Being able to swiftly move through the world via the ravine that is the Valley of the Drakes is divine, but it would not exist without this Metroidvania-like world design. In the other games, you can teleport between any bonfire at will, but in this game, bonfires aren't just checkpoints. Sure, they're a safe haven, but you can't quite flee to complete safety without any consequences. Even after it beat me down countless times, I really grew fond of it. It was so special, and because of that, I don't think that anything else that From Software makes could ever topple Dark Souls for me, and I'll forever treasure it. But that's not to say they're a one-hit wonder. In fact, their first attempt a couple years earlier was pretty successful too. Demon Souls is weird. In a good way, but weird. I've played both the original on very legitimate hardware, thank you very much, as well as the remake, and I can safely say that these are the exact same game. Now I know, the remake's slightly different, the art direction isn't identical and the music's closer to Bloodborne, but these games are the same in every way that matters. But what is unforgivable is this irremissible, vile, unwarrantable alteration to the language of Demon Souls, something so putrid it makes me sick to my stomach, and that transfiguration is the renaming of sticky white stuff to sticky white slime. And they thought, Bluepoint Games thought that they could get away with it. No, they can't. What was I talking about again? Oh, right. Demon Souls is obscenely obtuse. Rather than one large world, Boletaria is split up into 5 distinct levels. Each level has its own world tendency. When you slay a boss or a black phantom, the world tendency moves to white and the game gets a little bit easier. When you die or kill an NPC, world tendency moves to black and the game gets considerably harder. How fun! Except those rules aren't strictly the same across the game because some Black Phantoms lower world tendency and some bosses increase it more than others. Then you have character tendency, which is different to world tendency, except some actions change both tendencies and they have similar effects. Now you may be asking, how are you supposed to figure this out? As I said before, there are two versions of Demon Souls, but I don't really have any strong opinions about which one's better. I live a peaceful life. Anyways, the Demon Souls experience was less about the game itself and more so the PlayStation 5 experience in general for me. I've never had the opportunity to own a brand new next generation console within the first few months of it coming out, and getting to experience that alongside so many other people was fantastic. I know for a lot of people, Demon Souls would be their favourite Souls game because it feels so different to most other high profile releases today. There aren't really many mid-range games, I suppose you could call them. Nowadays all you've got are the tightly focused indies or the unfathomably large AAA where there's no room at all to experiment. And I really appreciate that Demon Souls decided to be weird. It might not be my favourite, gimmick bosses and the segmented level design aren't to my tastes, but the identity that Hidetaka Miyazaki forged in that game radiates throughout the series, and it's difficult to imagine what the video game landscape would be like in 2022 without the Souls genre. So why does Dark Souls 2 exist? The first game was born out of Sony owning the Demon Souls IP and Shuhei Yoshida having some thoughts on the game, meaning that the developers would probably need a new publisher to continue with the new genre they'd just created. Much of Dark Souls is similar to Demon Souls, extremely similar, but it's just different enough to have its own name. And like Demon Souls, Dark Souls has two rather definitive endings. Either the world is rekindled so it can crumble to ash for a few more years, or the darkness is given free rein to devour the world by extinguishing the flame. Which, if either is the good ending, isn't really clear. But then drunken old Dark Souls 2 comes in and says, "Actually, it doesn't matter which ending you picked, sorry!" Dark Souls 2 had a rocky development because there was a change of directors midway through, while Bandai Namco gave them very strict deadlines. Except unlike in the first game where only the second half suffered, Dark Souls 2 feels like it's missing something the entire time. But it was certainly ambitious. It was and still is the largest Souls game with the most amount of areas and bosses. As for whether or not that's a good thing, most are forgettable and lackluster. One of them is just the bell gargoyles from the first game, except now there's 30 of them. How inventive. It's a common complaint on the internet that a lot of Dark Souls 2's bosses are just dudes in armor, but I understand why there are so many dudes in armor. We all like Artorias, don't we? Some of the best bosses in this series are knights. That doesn't mean that knights aren't interesting, but none of them in Dark Souls 2 move or attack in an engaging way. It doesn't help that they're haphazardly placed in some of the most unremarkable locations. I don't think Dark Souls 2 is a bad game. In fact, I still think it's quite a good one. It's a Souls game after all. I didn't put 100 hours into it for no reason. There's a certain atmosphere in Drang Lake. Majula is one of my favourite places in the series. Sometimes I just like to sit there in VR and forget about everything going on outside. That being said, I adore just how disheartening Lothric is. You can really tell that Miyazaki didn't want to make Dark Souls 3 because he decided to end the bloody world. Dark Souls 3 is overbearingly brown and grey and I love it. Everything from the past and the present is collapsing in on itself, with heroes centuries old phasing in and out. Do you see what I did there? That's what Celeste says in the first game. The same people who once rekindled the flame are now allowing the termination of everything. Some have been corrupted by greed or the abyss, others have just accepted that this is it. If you decide to link the flame yourself, well, it doesn't really do much. I like how Dark Souls 3 doesn't bother with an earlier objective. There's no need to ringeth the bell of awakening or bear seek lest. You know the fate of the undead by this point, just get on with it. An unfortunate side effect of this is that Dark Souls 3 is quite linear, and where there is a choice, you still have to go down the other path eventually. It's not like Dark Souls 1 where you can skip half the game, or Dark Souls 2 where multiple paths are open right from the start. The order's quite rigid. That's not to say it's as strict as that one maths teacher you had when you were 7. You can fight an endgame boss early and explore that area almost immediately, but it's not like taking the master key and suddenly finding yourself in hell. I think for Dark Souls 3, that linearity was worth it because it makes the difficulty curve much smoother. Dark Souls 3 has some of the best bosses in the series. The Pontiff, the Nameless King, the Abyss Watchers, the list goes on. And for those bosses alone, it's worth playing this game to death.
This is the part where I talk about Bloodborne.
I hate to break it to you, but I don't have quite the hard-on for this game that most people on the internet do. But I can't put into words why. There's just something about it that makes me go from very strongly liking it to parading it around as the second coming of Cthulhu. One part of it was definitely the bosses. To be clear, before I'm the one that gets hunted, I haven't played the Old Hunters DLC, and I've heard that's the best part of Bloodborne. Sorry, but there aren't that many bosses in the main game, and maybe half of the few that are there I found to be quite forgettable. I don't think forgettable is the right word, because they do have very strong designs. I just don't think they were as good as the ones in Dark Souls 3. At the very least, for what Bloodborne lacks in bosses, it absolutely makes up for it in its combat design. Instead of carrying around one weapon with one moveset at a time where equipping another tanks your evasiveness, now equipment burden has been abolished and each weapon's capabilities have been greatly expanded. Trick weapons are so satisfying. Being able to transition from one weapon to a completely different kind of weapon on a dime is amazing, and it keeps combat fresh throughout the whole game. What isn't so fresh, unfortunately, is the NPC hunters. You know how you die in just a few hits, but you can heal, so it's okay. Wouldn't it be great if there were other enemies who had the same maneuverability with the same arsenal and the same healing ability as you? That'd be pretty incredible, right? So now what if those enemies also had an enormous health bar? What, you don't like that? Oops. But that's whatever, because Yharnam is really, really cool. Unfortunately, there's no Baked Beans land, and the architecture throughout the game is consistently gothic, but that gothic style is gorgeous. I prefer the medieval setting of Souls, but goddamn if this game doesn't look fantastic from start to end. That is what makes this game so good for me. The world. Yes, it's quite linear. Yes, I wish it had more bosses. Yes, I wish it was so much longer. Yes, you should be playing Bloodborne right now. What makes me really upset is the staggering number of people who undersell Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. It doesn't let you make your own build, and there's only really one weapon, but god damn it, that's why I love it so much. If it weren't for me playing Dark Souls first, Sekiro would probably be my favourite Souls game. But what it lacks in build variety, it absolutely makes up for it in its perfect difficulty curve. In the previous games, they had to ensure that everyone with any build could progress smoothly without any massive difficulty hurdles, but it's always been imperfect. Dark Souls 3 did a good job at trying to remedy the problem by making the game a lot more linear, but even so, I think that's flawed. But Sekiro doesn't have the typical level up system. Instead, you collect prayer beads from mini bosses and occasionally chests, and they increase your vitality and posture. You can also increase your damage output by obtaining memories by slaying main bosses. By restricting the player's stats, it becomes way easier for the developers to design an encounter since they know more accurately how powerful you'll be by that point in the game. Then there's your skill, which just naturally increases as you play the game. The early hours of Sekiro annihilated me and broke me an embarrassing number of times because I was playing the game like a monkey. I tried playing it like it was Bloodborne rather than Sekiro. The difficulty curve is so perfectly tuned that the harder version of the hardest enemy that you face about halfway through the game is just the warm-up to the final boss. It's funny to say the early hours because when I play the game now, rather than being maybe 7 or 8 hours, those early hours take about 30 minutes. Going through the game a second time after the combat clicked warmed the cockles of my heart. It felt wonderful, especially after going through the hell that was the final boss. It took me 5 hours of bashing my head against a wall over and over and over and over and over again to beat the bastard, and I loved every second of it. Then, in a later playthrough, I did it in only a couple attempts. It was wonderful. I love Sekiro Shadows Die Twice so much. And in 2022, we're about to see the culmination of over 13 years of work. A game that we knew absolutely nothing about for 2 whole years, and it's finally coming out. I'm afraid to say it, but I've been lying to you. You see, I've actually already played Elden Ring. Miyazaki, bathed in light, knocked on my door a few months ago and bestowed upon me, while trembling, a code for the network test on the PlayStation 5. I played it for about 5 hours. At the end of those 5 hours, the smile on my face could not have grown any larger. Riding around the lands between on Torrent, exploring each and every cavern, surveying the environment was all such a tease, and it made me even more excited for the final release. That fog wall in particular was such a tease because Limgrave, the starting area available in the network test, was already immensely vast, but that abrupt cutoff was painful. Elden Ring has a clear focus on exploration, and as someone whose favourite games include Breath of the Wild, that's terrific. The combination of Breath of the Wild and Dark Souls is just too enticing. But it's not because of the open world that I'm excited for Elden Ring. It could have been just like Dark Souls 3 and I would not have been disappointed in the slightest. Nor am I excited for Elden Ring because of George R.R. Martin's involvement, or the possibility that this could be the best game ever made or whatever. I'm excited for Elden Ring because it's another Souls game. And I know that might sound like me being complacent with the established From Software formula, but there really isn't anything quite like it. The first time you play any of these games, the experience is extraordinary. They've never disappointed me so far, and I doubt that Elden Ring will break their streak. At the end of the day, even if Elden Ring falls below expectations, which I highly doubt, a bad Souls game is still a bloody great game. And it's a bit surreal that it's finally within reach.